Evet. Good morning, Eli. Welcome. Please unmute yourself.
Yes. Good morning. Nice to be with you.
Okay. Today I'm grateful to Eli for accepting my invitation, for giving us a talk about an important topic that he personally coined to the literature. So we will have the chance to listen about this phenomenon from the very first hand who described it. I will like to briefly introduce Eli Somer. He's a clinical psychologist and a professor emeritus of psychology at University of Haifa. Professor Somer obtained his PhD degree from University of Florida, and he's the founder of Trauma, Dissociation, Israel, and co-founder and past president of European Society of Trauma and Dissociation. He is recipient of several awards for his work in trauma and dissociation. And in 2014, he received Lifetime Achievement Award from International Society of Trauma and Dissociation Society for his contributions. He has been treating survivors of trauma for over 35 years as mental health officer of Israel Defense Forces and later as a civilian psychotherapist. In 2002, he has identified a phenomenon of excessive absorptive daydreaming and coined its name Maladaptive daydreaming. Today, we're gonna listen about this phenomenon from himself. It's floor is yours, Eli.
Thank you very much. Let me just share the screen. Here I go. It's okay. It seems that you see my entire screen here. Let me just see if I can adjust that. Okay, so do you see what I don't see the option here in your setup to just show you the slide of the current slide. So we will have to adjust to that. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about a topic that strangely emerged very late in my career. I dedicated my entire career to the study of dissociative disorders, post-traumatic dissociative disorders. Did a lot of research and clinical work in this field. And it was in my clinic, actually, that I identified this phenomenon. So this, of course, many of you are clinicians, so what I'm sharing with you is an indication of how important is clinical work, because sometimes the most interesting findings come from the field, and then we go bottom up and formulate our findings. So this is what I'm going to share with you today. I have an ambitious program today, so I may not get to all the slides, but I'm confident that we'll be able to cover a lot of ground here. So first of all, daydreaming, of course, is an extremely broad and common phenomenon. It is presumed that almost everyone daydreams every day, but the term itself the term itself is not quite clear. There's not an agreement in the literature as to what daydreaming is, because most people refer to daydreaming as this off-task mental activity when we are just not concentrated and we are thinking about the shopping list or what to prepare for dinner, or rehearsing in our mind a conversation that we've had, or planning a conversation that we are going to have with someone. This is indeed fantasy, and it is referred to as daydreaming, but this is almost always revolving around the daily life, the reality of the individual. The kind of daydreaming that I'm referring to is something different, and we'll get to it in a moment. But at any rate, we are talking about perhaps a specific kind of fantasy life that is not like your normal mind wandering. This is the term that is actually more accurate for what I just described. That's thinking and imagining things that are related to our everyday life. So when we talk about daydreaming, we need to pay tribute to two important scholars, Singer and Klinger, who operated in the 60s, 70s. Singer is no longer with us, but Eric Klinger is in his 80s. He has published until the 1990s. And they regard daydreaming as a kind of a childhood activity that is associated with play. So when children play, they actually externalize their daydreaming, their fantasy. And often when children do that, I mean, we regard it as cute, as endearing. Certainly not when they talk to their dolls. We certainly see it as a perfectly normal behavior. So daydreaming in that sense is regarded as very adaptive. In fact, it is the children sort of rehearse and perfect their social skills. They regulate their emotions when they are distressed. They can imagine themselves hugging a teddy bear, or actually doing that and imagining receiving warmth and a sense of support.
Normal behavior.
And in that sense, it is not unlike what we see in nature, among wildlife, because when we look at animals, we can also see, for example, in this slide where we see an adult cheetah and the cubs, the cheetah cubs. So in this instance, the cheetah cubs are in fantasy world. They are playing. They are perhaps practicing hunting skills. But they are completely oblivious to their surroundings. So in that sense, it is very important that the mother is positioned on the termite mound and scanning the surrounding and the environment. So as you can see, as adults, and this is probably an evolutional process, as adults, we lose some of that tendency to immerse ourselves in fantasy because it is not conducive to survival. For survival as adults, we need to pay close attention to the stressors in our environment and react to the environment and to any threat coming from the environment. I think that similar processes happen among us human beings. Most children are endowed with this ability to fantasize extensively, but but as we grow up, we are more and more oriented and grounded in the external reality. But as any trait, as any ability, we have a variation, ranging from a modest ability to fantasize and to imagine and to visualize stuff and to act out play, to a very extensive such ability. So when we're talking about maladaptive daydreaming, I maintain, and I propose to you, that it is based on a trait. When I say that it is based on a trait, it means that it is not something learned. And indeed, you cannot copy or mimic a mental activity. So for example, if a parent has it, the child cannot mimic it because it is internal. So it is a trait that, and maybe even we can call it a gift or a talent. I, for example, don't have this talent. I don't have this ability to have a sense of presence in my fantasy. My fantasies are very shallow, are very, I don't have a good visualization and a sense of presence in my fantasies. And I think this is the case for most people, but some people have the talent, the ability to get lost in their fantasies because it feels very real to them. And this trait, this special trait, we call immersive daydreaming. So we are talking about extensive daydreaming that people are absorbed in it. It's like almost perhaps associated with a state of hypnosis or an altered state of consciousness, where people are completely focused on the fantasy at the expense of awareness to other stimulations. People can be absorbed, of course, in a film, in a cinema, in a book, in music, and be completely in it. So it is extensive in a sense that it is not just a brief image, it is absorptive, as I described, it is fanciful. Fanciful meaning that it's not just about planning the dinner for tonight, it is about spinning and weaving a plot, a complex plot, like almost like a script writer that has different protagonists, that has interactions. And it is volitional fantasy activity, meaning that in most cases, it is not intrusive, so it is not psychotic. Although we are talking about experiences that are sensory, I would not be surprised if you in your university hospital conduct brain imagery, scanning the brains of these individuals while they are immersed in immersive daydreaming. I would not be surprised if you see the sensory centers in the brain firing up. So it is, but the important point I want to stress here that it is not a hallucination that is intrusive, but it is volitional. The people can activate it and deactivate it, because their attention is split. So we're talking about a split, therefore I believe it is dissociative, a split in conscious awareness, where people are mostly immersed in their fantasy, but they also have some sort of awareness about what's going on outside. Let me give you an example, a very common example of immersive daydreaming that you may have experienced today driving. I see some of you are listening from home, but when you drive from a place to place on a route that is familiar to you, sometimes you arrive to your destination and you don't remember having driven this distance. You don't remember doing it. You suddenly arrived and you're there. And where was your mind? Your mind was in mind wandering or in fantasy. So this is pretty amazing. I mean, this is a very, very common phenomenon, but it's pretty amazing because you realize that you were not paying attention to the traffic, yet you arrived to your destination safely. And this is an indication of how our mind, our awareness, our consciousness, in a non-pathological way, can split itself. I think it is very advantageous to, as an adaptation, because it is very efficient. When we do an automatic behavior that we don't need to pay attention to, our mind can do something else. So it's very efficient. So when we wash our dishes at the sink, we don't really need to pay attention to how we scrub every fork and every spoon, because it is an automatic behavior. And in the meantime, we can listen, enjoy a concert that we are playing on our stereo and pay attention to that. What is unusual about maladaptive daydreaming, and here we come to some of the enigmas, some of the things that remain to be explored and really tied in with some neurological constructs that we don't understand very well, is that this fantasy is frequently associated with repetitive physical movement, stereotypical movement that can look to the external observer as autistic-like, pacing back and forth, twirling an object in the hand, rocking. It may look autistic, and it may look even stranger when people are mouthing their dialogues. They are moving their mouths. They look. So you can see somebody on the street walking and talking to themselves. They may look completely crazy to you, but they may just be a very normal, adaptive person who is immersed in his or her fantasy, doing this walking and mouthing, just moving the mouth and gesturing. Most of these people are aware that they're doing that and are quite embarrassed about it. So they have self-awareness. Because the phenomena is unknown, most of them think that they are the only persons in the world who have this disorder, and they usually do it in privacy. Most of these people, to the extent that they can help it, would hide it from others, would hide it from family members. So that's one, again, a very characteristic feature. And the other one is the role of music. Music is also reported by these individuals as extremely important to trigger their fantasies or to maintain their fantasies. And of course, it is, as you can imagine, those of you who don't have this ability, as you can imagine, it can be extremely rewarding, because you can become the master of your own universe. You can do, really whatever, and have a sense of presence as if it were real. So, and it is not for an illicit drug. It is legal. It is highly accessible. It is between your ears. And it is highly rewarding because not only because it is fun, it is simply fun, a fun activity, but also because, if you can imagine, if you have emotional pain or childhood memories of trauma or other psychiatric issues, this can serve as a fantastic distraction and as a very effective means for emotional distress regulation. So it can really serve as a means of coping. But here I'm creating the ground to try to convince you, and later I will also show you some evidence that this can then become addictive, because you don't need to work very hard to become this world-class musician you aspire to be. You simply can be there on stage, performing in front of a stadium full of admirers and perform some virtuoso solo pieces with the crowd cheering and enjoy that. So why go back to reality and waste time and efforts to work hard to achieve that, or maybe not achieve that in the future, when you can get immediate shortcut to this outcome. So this is when immersive daydreaming can evolve into a compulsion or into addiction. And when these people wake up to reality, of course, the gap between the fantasy and the idealized self and the gray reality is so stark, the gap is so big, that of course it creates disappointment and depression, particularly since the time spent in fantasy is actually wasted time. And this is okay if you do it perhaps 1 or 2 hours a day, but you can imagine that people, and I'm telling you that this is the case, that some people spend many, many hours, and in extreme cases, all their waking hours immersed in their fantasies. So when this immersive daydreaming creates distress, because, for example, the disappointment and the depression associated with it, and or if it interferes with the completion of the daily responsibilities, academic, school, interpersonal, or professional responsibilities, then we have the hallmarks of psychopathology. In the DSM, no diagnosis is complete unless a necessary condition is met. It should create distress or dysfunction. If no distress or dysfunction exists, then the whole list of symptoms do not qualify for a disorder. So this is the same here as I propose. So this is immersive daydreaming that could have the hallmarks that I described a minute ago, but unless it has these features of psychopathology, it should not be considered a disorder. What you should also know that maladaptive daydreaming, the scale that we have developed is highly correlated with the dissociative experiences scale, the DES, particularly with the absorption factor. I may show you this later on. And maladaptive daydreaming is also highly comorbid with attention deficit disorder, the inattentive type, the attention deficit part. It is also highly comorbid with obsessive compulsive disorder, with depression, and with anxiety. As time permits, I will go into this later. The next slide here is about a father talking to his daughter. She looks about 5 years old. He posted it on YouTube, so this is public domain. I'm not breaching any privacy or confidentiality here. And he asks her about Carlos, her imaginary friend. So you may want to get an impression about this cute child and her experience.
Hey, Katie. Who is Carlos?
He's my best friend and he's my brother.
Okay. Carlos, where's Carlos at right now?
He's right beside me.
Right beside you. Okay. And you played with Carlos at school?
Yes.
And does Carlos play with your friends at school?
Yes.
Can they see Carlos?
Yes.
And then Carlos goes home with his mommy and daddy at the end of school?
They come with you and Mama.
Okay, so when we was at Buffalo Wild Wings the other day, as a family, Carlos was there?
Yes, he was.
He rode in the car with us. He got out the car, and then he sat down at the table with us at Buffalo Wild Wings.
Yes, he did. He did.
Okay, what is Carlos doing right now?
He's playing around me.
How old is Carlos?
3 like me.
Okay.
How did you meet Carlos?
I went at school and meet Carlos.
So you met Carlos at school?
Yes.
So Carlos came from school
Yes.
to the house with you?
Yes.
Wait, why you look behind me?
Because
Was something behind me?
no.
So Carlos just decided to come home with you one day from school,
Yes.
and you told him it was okay.
Hey, Katie.
Okay, so this cute girl, apparently she's 3, describes very vividly in a very charming way her imaginary friend. Again, imaginary friends is a normal childhood activity. But again, please consider the fact that some of these children don't lose this ability to imagine their imaginary friends or other themes. And of course, it's very interesting, what are the themes that are chosen by adult maladaptive daydreamers? And what is the function of these themes? We will talk about it later, but I would like to show you another child. This one was filmed by his parents and shared with me, and I was given permission to share it with professional audience. Here is a boy who is engaged. He's in his inner world, but you will be able to see the movement, the stereotypical movement. So he skips and goes in circles, and sometimes makes some vocalizations. Let's watch him. So note that the child appears not to engage these are not completely aimless movements. He is walking back and forth. He seems to be mouthing. He's saying something. Also note his dual awareness, because although he's absorbed internally, he is paying attention to a parent. He's sort of looking, the parent is filming. And also he, at one point, walks on this straight line of blocks of stone. So he is aware of external reality, but he is lost in his inner world. And when the parents ask the child, "What are you doing?" I mean, he looks a little autistic. Then imagine he's doing it for hours every day. Yes, so it's not completely normal behavior. He would tell his parents about his inner world. He has a completely rich inner world with many protagonists. So let me just give you a very brief history of this condition, how this emerged, because it's very interesting in itself. And I wrote a paper about the process of the discovery of this. It all started at the beginning of the millennium. As I told you, I'm a scientist practitioner. So I'm a practitioner, but I also do research about my practice. And I already told you that I specialize in trauma-related disorders and dissociative disorders. So my initial observation of maladaptive daydreaming was made in my trauma practice. And as expected, and this paper was published in 2002, but let me go to one of the tables. This is just it was an extended case report of 6 patients. And what I circled here in these blue lines is the history of aversive childhood experiences, and all of them had some form from moderate to severe trauma. I wrongly concluded at the time that this is a trauma-related dissociative phenomenon, like depersonalization, derealization, and so I was not completely wrong, but I was wrong in concluding that this is an exclusively trauma-related disorder. But this is what I suggested in this paper. But the paper, this little paper, which I published in a medium quality clinical paper, not the top of the line journals, this paper received absolutely no feedback or attention from the scientific community. It created no interest, and I dropped it. I dropped the issue. But something very interesting happened in the meantime. In those years, 2002 to 2009, it seems that people out there were Googling their symptoms. People with maladaptive daydreaming were Googling their symptoms, apparently writing compulsive daydreaming, excessive daydreaming, pathological daydreaming. And the term, which did not exist until 2002, was caught by a lot of these individuals. I didn't know that at the time. And then a bottom-up campaign of political pressure from the consumers was directed at me. And I described it in this paper here in 2018, The Micropolitics of a New Mental Condition, Legitimization in Maladaptive Daydreamers Discourse. So the term maladaptive, it's a very odd term. It's not a new, in English, it sounds unusual. I'm not sure how it is translated into Turkish, because in many languages it's difficult to find the correct equivalent. But the reason I chose this odd word, maladaptive, is because I didn't want to be presumptive to tell it that it's a disorder based on these 6 patients. I was not in a position to call it a disorder. So I call it maladaptive daydreaming. But the term was non-existent. But what happens, look at this amazing process. When you Google maladaptive daydreaming in inverted commas as a direct, exact phrase, you get today 433,000 results for a term that did not exist before 2002. And even in Turkish, when you Google it, you get over close to 600, 500 results for this term. Let's look at Google Trends. I mean, this is sort of an interesting history. I searched in Turkey only, but I used English words because I don't know the Turkish words for it. By using English words, what we captured here is searches by scientists and by professionals who use so you can see the colors here are represented in the trends here. So you can see that mind wandering is almost flat, almost not searched, you can see during those years. Dissociation is a very important clinical psychological term, has been searched in Turkey. But look at the blue line. Maladaptive daydreaming, you can see that recently there is an increase, particularly in the last year. I would not be surprised if this has something to do with your work, Barish, or or maybe I know there is a Turkish group of maladaptive daydreaming that have formed on Facebook, but something is happening, even in Turkey. When we look at the trends worldwide, this is worldwide trends, not in Turkey, but the whole world. Look at mind wandering, this is the red line. This is the term that is still used for daydreaming. Look at dissociation, very heavily present. There are thousands and thousands of research studies on dissociation. But look at maladaptive daydreaming. So this is a change in public interest in maladaptive daydreaming since the publication of the first paper. And this change comes from consumers, not from scientists. This is still an under-researched phenomena, but there is a community out there, a very big community of individuals who want to see this, this disorder medicalized. So usually when we talk to patients, they sometimes complain, or we talk to other academics, they complain that we, psychologists and psychiatrists, over-medicalize behaviors that should be considered within the range of normality. And psychiatrists are criticized for just making the DSM thicker and thicker and thicker with every new edition. So we are frequently criticized for over-medicalization. But here we have the opposite process. We have the consumers, the stakeholders, the potential patients pleading us to medicalize this. So 2002 to 2009 was marked by a cascading flow of consumer inquiries at me, writing to me, and I abandoned this already. I was doing my dissociation, trauma and dissociation work, asking me to continue to do the research on this. So here's an example. This is an email. I mean, I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, that I have a collection of thousands of emails from individuals from all corners of the world, including Turkey, asking me to continue to do research and volunteering to be subjects in our studies. I have currently a waiting list of 1,200 individuals waiting to participate in research. This is a luxury that many of you don't have who are researching. We know how difficult it is to get the clinical samples. So here's one email. Hello, my name is so-and-so, and I have had this disorder for as long as I can remember. Up until a year ago, I thought I was the only person that excessively daydreamed. I've read about you and your research about this, and I saw a video of you on the Wild Minds website. If you still are interested in interviewing people about maladaptive daydreaming, I think I could be very helpful. From what I've read, I seem to have a much different way of experiencing this disorder, so there's still a part of me that feels very alone. But I'm hoping with more research, more questions will be answered about this. This is really fascinating. I mean, the process itself. In the meantime, these courageous testimonials, these people went on YouTube and started talking with their faces exposed and with their identities exposed. I have maladaptive daydreaming. This is what I'm suffering. And they created their own YouTube channels with discussions. So slowly, internet communities started developing around these themes. YouTube, of course, is a social network, but so is Facebook, and so are many others. And even in Turkey, as you can see, the Maladaptive Daydreaming, the Turkish group, has 768 members. These are Turkish individuals talking in Turkish, supporting each other, providing each other with advice, because there are when they go to the doctors, they're being dismissed as you have nothing, or being diagnosed as something else and given treatment for something else that is not helpful to them. So they are resorting to self-help. And these self-help groups are very cooperative with researchers. And these are again two more examples of Turkish groups that I found. I don't speak Turkish, so it was very difficult for me to search this, but I am aware of these groups because the owners and the moderators of these groups have contacted me. It seems that, and now I'm describing to you the process of the discovery and the emergence. This has been covered by many news media. I don't know why. This is something interesting. It captures the imagination of journalists. So this disorder has been featured on CNN. You can see CNN Health in television, but they also have a website with the stories. Here's Fox News, again, Maladaptive Daydreaming. Wall Street Journal, this is the most conservative American journal, very respected, again, a very big story. BBC, complete with a television story about this. US News and World Report. And in Turkey, difficult for me to follow, but there are also information about this in news outlets, online news outlets in Turkey as well. So to make a long story short, at 2009, 2010, I resumed my research in this field. And frankly, I'm doing nothing other than this. And in 2019, by the way, I retired from teaching at the university. I still have my practice, but I'm a full-time researcher of maladaptive daydreaming. I thought I would do almost no research after retiring, but I'm doing more research now than ever before. Now, this is not to tell you about my achievements. This is not my point. My point is that this construct is gaining more and more interest, and the community out there, the maladaptive daydreaming community, is eager to participate. So research is booming, and it is really, and you are welcome to visit our website. There are currently some 50 peer-reviewed articles, and luckily in Turkey as well, we have some interest in this from your university. My host, Barish, has led one of the studies in the field related to the COVID-19. I really hope that this will continue, because you do have the resources, the respondents are there to help you. It is for Barish to present his paper. It's not been published yet, but we are very confident that it is going to be published. So during the first lockdown, we cooperated. I'm talking April to June last year. A few colleagues cooperated in Italy, Israel, and Turkey. And we studied some over 1,000 individuals. And indeed, we found that maladaptive daydreaming is not working as an effective coping method with the stress of COVID-19, with the stress of lockdown. In fact, these parameters of the lockdown and the pre-existing mental health condition, of course, exacerbated and made maladaptive daydreaming worse. So the study that hopefully is going to be accepted for publication soon demonstrated that maladaptive daydreaming is an index, one index of distress. The more people are distressed, the more they tend to daydream pathologically, particularly this form of daydreaming. if we're talking about the current pandemic, which is a global crisis, let me just tell you that we also found that compared to individuals with normal daydreaming, indeed, those with this condition, with the maladaptive daydreaming, report a significant deterioration in a wide array of mental health indices. So the overall psychological well-being of individuals with maladaptive daydreaming was significantly worse during the lockdown across many countries. And this is published today. Today I received this announcement that the study that I have advised and supervised, but was not one of the leading researchers, so I'm a co-author. But the credit goes to this Italian team. They researched over 6,000 individuals looking at maladaptive daydreaming, and they reported that these individuals experience high levels of anxiety and depression and decreased online social relationships. So apparently we concluded that exposure to the risks and the threats of the lockdown moved people to lock themselves inside their mental fantasies, in their inner world, and turn away from social interactions and relationships. And this resulted in worsening their emotional distress. So this paper is online. Frontiers is, of course, open access, so you can see it today. Let's talk a little bit about measurement. Again, if you Google daydreaming research, you will almost get the first hit, almost our research website. We have developed the maladaptive daydreaming scale. It is translated into many languages, including Turkish, and was utilized by the group of Professor Metin, the Turkish translation. It is a statistically solid measure. We have evidence that it demonstrates good validity, good internal consistency, and it discriminates well between self-identified individuals with this condition and those who don't have it. So it is an excellent measure for the study of maladaptive daydreaming, and I hope it will be validated in Turkey soon. So this instrument was validated in Arabic, in French, in English, Hebrew, Hungarian, and Italian, which is pretty cool. 37 languages. We have 37 translations. How did we get to this? I mean, I don't push for these translations, but of course the stakeholders out there, and there are people with maladaptive daydreaming who are very talented individuals. Some of them are journalists, some of them are social workers, psychologists, translators. And every now and then I get an offer from somebody in Japan or in Poland or in Serbia or whatever to translate the instrument so it could be useful for the maladaptive daydreaming community and the academic community in their own country. So currently it's been translated into Urdu, which is the Pakistani language, and into 2 or 3 more languages. But this is, again, part of the amazing process here. I mean, this effort from bottom up to make it recognized, a recognized disorder. We have developed some diagnostic criteria for what we now dare call a daydreaming disorder. And for this diagnostic criteria, we must have this persistent, recurrent fantasy activity that I described to you, vivid and fanciful and so on. And it must be present for at least 6 months. and it should have at least 2 of these 8 criteria, but one of them must be criteria 1. While daydreaming experiences an intense sense of absorption, immersion that includes visual, auditory, or affective, meaning emotional properties. And then we list some of the other characteristics. So it must have at least these 2. It must have criterion B, that it cause clinically distress or impairment. If it does not cause clinically significant distress or impairment, then it is immersive daydreaming. It is a trait. It's normal. But of course, we didn't include a time measure, because you could argue if you daydream 2 hours a day, then you're fine. But if you daydream 8 hours a day, then it's pathological. But that's not how the DSM works. In the DSM, you must have distress or dysfunction. And of course, criteria C is the ruling out the differential diagnosis. So you need to be convinced as a clinician that what you see is not better explained by schizophrenia, by OCD, and such other disorders. And let me tell you that we tested these diagnostic criteria. We transformed these diagnostic criteria into a structured clinical interview, like the SCID for the DSM. There's a structured clinical interview for the DSM. We developed a structured clinical interview for maladaptive daydreaming, and we conducted a study where 2 trained researchers who were blind to who they are assessing evaluated this instrument. And we found a very high inter-rater agreement with Cohen kappas ranging between 0.63 to 0.84. Here are the kappa values for other DSM disorders. And you see that maladaptive daydreaming ranks very high compared to, for example, 0.28 inter-rater agreement. Cohen kappa is a measure for inter-rater agreement for major depressive disorder. 0.46 for schizophrenia. We achieved 0.63 to 0.84 on maladaptive daydreaming. So it's a solid profile of criteria that can generate reliable diagnosis. We are now developing other measures, the child maladaptive daydreaming checklist, some other measures that we are testing now for future research. There are related constructs that we need to pay attention to. For example, fantasy-prone personality. Fantasy-prone personality has been proposed to be prevalent in about 7–8% of the population. It talks about the tendency to daydream, but this is a very loosely incoherent construct, and the measure tries to assess beliefs in unusual occult phenomena, in extrasensory perception, in all sort of mysterious things, and also measures behaviors as a child, which is unreliable as an adult to talk about how you were as a child. So this is a problematic construct, but it is related to it. I think it is not used very widely. Other related construct is mind wandering. We talked about that. It is highly researched. And I know that some of you have interest in default mode network. This is where this default mode network will be activated in mind wandering. But will it be activated during maladaptive daydreaming? My personal hunch is not, that it will not be activated in maladaptive daydreaming. I might be wrong. It needs to be, we need to put these people in the scanners. Why not? Because in maladaptive daydreaming, the mind is not off task. The mind is on task. People are concentrated and they're doing a mental work. It's not the mind is idle and jumps from one association to the other. This is an active development of a plot, of a scene, with emotions, so I will be surprised if the default mode network is activated in maladaptive daydreaming. But again, this is the exciting part that we need to find out. And I know that some of you, Barish included, is interested in brain imaging. So here is your next challenge, and you have your 700 Turkish volunteers there waiting. Let's talk a little bit about stereotypical movement disorder. Stereotypical movement disorder is in the DSM. I looked it up because I was interested in stereotypical movement, and I wonder if the DSM mentions at all any disorder related to stereotypical movement. And indeed, it's there. It's somehow related to tics, and it's a childhood disorder. Not a lot of literature on this, but I went to the literature, and guess what I found? I found reports that these children are engaged in fantasy when they do their stereotypical movement. So as we are wondering what are the childhood antecedents of maladaptive daydreaming, apparently, most probably it was lying out there in plain sight. It's probably stereotypical movement disorder, or maybe a subset of stereotypical movement disorder that is diagnosed based on the external visible behavior, like this boy that was moving around and looked autistic, but he wasn't. You need to ask these children, what are they doing inside their mind when they're moving like this? This phenomenon is very important. When we saw this little girl talking about Carlos, her imaginary friend, these are psychological phenomena where the friendship or the interpersonal relationship occur in the mind. And so these imaginary friends, as you saw, they seem very real to this little child. And I think that this is the normal precursor of maladaptive daydreaming. And I think this is a dissociative phenomenon. Like dissociation, people dissociate and imagine. I think these imaginary friends are, of course, projections of the self. So the child who feels lonely, for example, or bored, projects a part of himself because it's a creation of the child's mind. It's not a jinn possession. It's a creation of the child's mind, and the child interacts with it. By the way, this could also be the precursor of dissociative identity disorder, the most severe dissociative disorder, where people have several identities. This possibly could also start with this normal ability to fantasize and to make elements of the self real and external. What is the evidence that maladaptive daydreaming is dissociative? We conducted a statistical analysis that confirmed that the maladaptive daydreaming scale is indeed significantly correlated with the dissociative experiences scale, but look, it is most highly correlated. These are the subscales of the DS: absorption, amnesia, and depersonalization. It is most highly correlated with the absorption subscale of the dissociative experiences scale, with a very high effect size. Cohen-D's effect size from 0.8 to infinity is considered a large effect. So this is one of the evidences that we have. It is, to what extent is it dissociative? First of all, we know that it helps people distance themselves from a painful present. So we know that people, when they're undergoing torture, or women, when they are being sexually abused, they sometimes report that they leave their bodies. They have an out-of-body experience. They are disconnected from their bodies. It serves as a defense mechanism. To what extent does this form of daydreaming serve as a defense mechanism? We know that about a quarter of the people with the maladaptive daydreaming report they have problems in social functioning. They have social phobia, social anxiety. So of course, this is correlational. We don't know the direction, the causality here. So you could very well argue that the more you engage in your fantasy, the less skillful you will be in interpersonal relationships, because you isolate yourself. But we know when we talk to these people, when we interview them, not just give them out questionnaires to fill out, but when we interview them in depth, we know that the ability to fantasize preceded their social anxiety. This was a trait they discovered very early on. And, but of course, when this ability interacts with social anxiety, then it is so rewarding to have a compensatory experience, a compensatory emotional experience. So these children can imagine themselves with their imaginary friends as not so lonely anymore. But when we talk to these individuals, indeed they tell us when they feel alone, when they feel distress, they go to the inner mind, they go to the fantasy. So this, again, is a dissociative function. Another form of evidence comes from, again, these interviews. You know, we usually, the scientists, we like to conduct objective research with statistical analysis. But in psychology, in mental health, a lot of important information is lost when you come with your set of hypotheses. So it is very important, particularly in a new field, when you don't have a lot of knowledge, to come with an open mind and learn from what I call the experts by experience. These individuals can teach us. We cannot presume to know. So when we talk to them, they generate very rich information. For example, here is what this person said about the maladaptive daydreaming. I grew up with some physical, but mostly emotional, abusive people. I was always the scapegoat. There were fights between the parents and they would blame their problems on me, screaming on the top of their lungs at me for hours and hours every night. So these are the childhood circumstances of a person who developed maladaptive daydreaming and now is sort of addicted to it. Another person said, when I was younger, my mother, who had many problems, left me alone and rarely engaged with me. I was left in the care of babysitters who neglected and abused me. So here is active abuse and emotional fear, and here in the lower quote, you have loneliness and sadness. So one way of coping is to create an alternative inner family. This is a frequent theme. But again, it tells the story of a dissociative process in which a person detaches from the immediate reality and creates an alternative reality. And of course, this is very soothing, it is very comforting. And it would not be a psychopathology. It serves as a regulating, emotionally regulating mechanism unless it creates dysfunction or distress, this necessary condition. So here is what one individual said about the function of this kind of fantasy. My imagined perfect family is a lot different from my family in reality. It's like actually having a family life of how I want it to be, setting up this perfect little world inside my head. Over time, it changed. I'm married. I have like 11 children, 12 grandkids. I live a very comfortable life with my family. We all go on holidays. Everything is just really good. And another person said, I would daydream about family, mainly a brother and a sister about 17 years of age, very beautiful and successful, and they were each other's best friends and felt deep love for each other, something I never had in reality. I think you get the feeling from these quotes. You know, it has served its purpose in getting me through my childhood, says this individual. I hated every aspect of my life and needed to get as far from that life as possible. As a teenager, I started daydreaming about my life. I imagined myself having a different life. What about dissociative identity disorder? So now we realize that it serves as a form of a split of reality. Dissociative identity disorder is very different. Here also, individuals they hear voices, they can sometimes have hallucinations, they have Schneiderian symptoms, more than schizophrenics, people with DID. But what is characteristic of DID, the main characteristic, is that the alternate identities take control over the personality. This does not happen in maladaptive daydreaming. Of course, there could be overlap, there could be comorbidity, we found that. But people who have only maladaptive daydreaming, they are in control over these protagonists in their fantasies, and they never control them. They don't lose control. In dissociative identity disorder, because it is such a trauma-based mental psychiatric phenomena, there is also amnesia between the identities, because one identity, at least one, would presumably hold the trauma memory, perhaps a child part. So when that child is out, often the part that is apparently normal and deals with the external world would have a blackout, an episode of amnesia. This never happens in maladaptive daydreaming. What could happen in maladaptive daydreaming, that people would, like in the driving example, would not have clear memory of what happened, but it's not amnesia, and they're also partially aware, because when you drive from one destination to another and your mind is elsewhere, if an emergency happens on the road, you will react immediately. You will step on the brakes, you will steer your car away, you negotiate, and bear this in mind. When you reach your destination, you have negotiated the traffic, you have negotiated with other cars, you obeyed the traffic signs. So this is evidence that there's no complete amnesia and compartmentalization of the two processes. In DID, there is complete compartmentalization of the processes, not in maladaptive daydreaming, but there are similarities. We found a 77% comorbidity with ADHD, the inattentive type. This is a very, very high comorbidity rate. Comorbidity is not unusual in the DSM. DSM is not far from perfect, and there is a lot of comorbidity between the various disorders. So if maladaptive daydreaming is ever going to be included as a daydreaming disorder, it too will have comorbidity. But this unusual high comorbidity rate of 77% with ADHD is remarkable. By the way, I already going to preempt and answer a question that has not been asked yet. We tested individuals with ADHD, and the comorbidity rate in the ADHD population with maladaptive daydreaming is about 20%. So this is not an overlap. We're talking about different conditions. And indeed, there could be a subset of individuals with attention deficit disorder who have maladaptive daydreaming. But what sort of attention deficit do they have? Apparently, the individuals with maladaptive daydreaming, they simply they do not pay enough attention to the external world. This is why they are inattentive. They don't have hyperactivity. So this is ADHD inattentive type. And this makes a lot of sense. So they have inattentiveness. They make careless mistakes. They appear forgetful. They start reading something and their mind goes away to the fantasy. So this is an important finding because now we need to convince our colleagues who are experts in attention in ADHD to consider the fact that maybe there's a subset of patients they're treating that should be receiving perhaps a different type of treatment to address this mental behavior that is causing the distraction. Is maladaptive daydreaming an OCD spectrum disorder? That's another issue, because we're having this repetitive mental behavior and a compulsion to continue to do it over and over again. Some people with maladaptive daydreaming tell me that they need to perfect their daydreaming. They don't leave it until it is perfect, which sounds exactly like OCD. And in our research, we found in a daily measurement study, daily measurement means that they need to fill out for 14 days, the participants needed to fill out questionnaires reporting about their daydreaming and about obsessive compulsive symptoms. And they were precursors and consequences of maladaptive daydreaming. Obsessive compulsive symptoms appear before or after maladaptive daydreaming. This is in a daily study. When we studied, we measured day after day. So perhaps this is another interesting window for future research to try to understand the possible shared mechanisms between the symptoms of maladaptive daydreaming and OCD. So to make the picture more complicated, is this form of emotional regulation is it a form of a behavioral addiction? Says one individual, it's just enjoyable. The characters are familiar to me. They are like friends. It's entertaining, comforting, and sometimes it is just escape when I want to be in a different world other than the one I am in. It's comforting, enjoyable pastime. It would be upsetting for me if I couldn't access it. So you have, it sounds like a habit, a rewarding habit or an addiction. I prefer daydreaming because my life is boring. As soon as my husband leaves for work, I turn my imagination on, and sometimes I'm in my own world for the entire morning. It sure beats cleaning and cooking. It's much better than that. What is important, and this is in contrast to my original paper from 2002, trauma, again, is not a necessary condition. Here I'm already providing you with evidence, because in one study, we found that only 27% of the respondents reported childhood trauma or abuse history. So still, there is a high correlation between childhood trauma and maladaptive daydreaming, but it's not a necessary condition because you can become addicted to this form of mental activity even if you don't have past trauma. So back to maladaptive daydreaming as a compulsive mental behavior, and compulsions are related to addictions. It is somehow on the same spectrum because in compulsions and addictions, you get this craving, this tension that is resolved by the compulsion or by the addictive behavior. Briefly, and then again, there's tension and it repeats itself. So there's an overlap. And here's a blog by a maladaptive daydreaming, a blog, and the title of this post is Maladaptive Daydreaming and Addiction of the Mind. So this is how they talk about it. This is how they experience it. So like an addiction, maladaptive daydreaming produces limited short-time relief or limited short-time gratification, but it has long-term negative effects on mental health. We've proven this again and again. So on the long run, it is at the expense of being productive and being engaged in the obligations one has in real life. And indeed, we have strong evidence that it is associated with worsened psychosocial problems among survivors of childhood abuse. So individuals with a background of childhood abuse if they have maladaptive daydreaming, they don't benefit from it. Our evidence shows that survivors of child sexual abuse who have maladaptive daydreaming are psychiatrically worse than survivors who don't have it. Okay? So it is not a helpful defense mechanism because it actually removes the individuals from real life, from real relationships. Here is a paper of a table of the comorbidities, and you can see that this is the rate for attention deficit disorder, but here are anxiety disorders, comorbidity, mostly with social anxiety disorder. About 43%, 44% have social anxiety. And they have alternative social life in their own minds. So it's highly comorbid with other conclusions. So in conclusion, at this point, unless we have other evidence, I regard maladaptive daydreaming as a dissociative disorder with features of a behavioral addiction. Let's look, we have a little bit more time. Let's look at their artistic expression, which is also fascinating. Here you have a picture of somebody who is socially anxious, and she represents one of her main themes of fantasy, and it has a compensatory function. She is, this socially anxious individual is at the center of attention. She is speaking and lecturing in front of many people. This is not, of a high artistic quality, but this is not important. We ask them just to describe their experience, to describe their maladaptive daydreaming. So here is somebody, this is difficult to see because it is in pencil, how one feels weighed down by this large wobbly head. The head is full, of course, of fantasy. And the head leans in the opposite direction of where the body wants to move. So the body wants to move towards goals, ambition. It's written here, success, self-esteem, confidence. But you see there is these waves coming from the neck because the head is wobbly. It is weighing the person down in the opposite direction. And there is a tear here coming from the eye, because portraying in a pictorial way the frustration, the sadness of not being able to achieve the really important goals in life. Here is a humoristic representation of maladaptive daydreaming as an internal entertainment system. So while other people require electricity to watch television, when there is no light, you see the person is sad, there's nothing to watch. Here is a happy person because in their mind, they have the entertainment system and it is unplugged. They don't need electricity. So this is, this person shares with us how fortunate he is. It's a young man, how fortunate he is for having this. In this presentation here, the respondent is cutting with scissors here, right here, his or her ties, he says me here, with society. This is society. Family, marriage, work, money, knowledge. This is society. And they think of him or her as maladjusted, weird, and the person is cutting these ties. But in their mind, look, this is in black and white, this is in color. This is the fantasy world where they have family, where they have knowledge and wisdom. So this is the contrast here is in the coloring. Monochrome, gray, external world, colorful, inner world, but a cutting of the contact with society. Here's another example of a person describing her experience. This person is blind to the external world. She does not see it, but there is something inside that sees something else. There is an inner vision, but no contact with the external world. Here is another example of blindness. Dark external, gray, monochrome external, and the person is surrounded by boundaries, yellow, black, red, completely isolated from the external world. Here's another interesting self-representation. It is difficult to see, but the person is a stick figure. She has earphone. This is the back, this is the knees and the leg, this is the hand. There are musical notes, and she is in her bubble. Her bubble is colorful. Again, this is a completely different person. And this is the external world, time ticking, social life, work. This is what she writes. Anxiety, it is again mostly in monochrome, but the inner world, she's in bed, you see, she's isolated, she's in bed, not functioning, listening to music, and having this colorful inner world. Here is a depiction of a dreamy character immersed in her colorful fantasy, where rabbits do not cease to emerge from her hat. So more and more rabbits come out of her hat. It's like a hat of a magician. But perhaps what she wants to tell us that she lost control over the magic of immersive daydreaming. She's not in control. The place is full of rabbits. And here's a very powerful image, a wonderful illustration of the schism, the separation between the rich fantasy world and the dreary, monochrome, black external world. So it's a dramatic contrast, and she's happy. She's happy because all of that wonderful, colorful, imaginative processing going on in her mind, and she's in movement. You see, she's not standing, but there's some kind of movement implied in this. And a very similar in terms of the colors, is this, and again, a completely different person, a contrast between a rich inner world and black and white external reality. Okay, so what is our model, the etiological model? And then we are really running out of time. I could go a little bit longer. Could someone tell me what is the latest time that we need to stop? Could somebody unmute and tell me what is the latest time? How much time do we have maximum?
Eli, we're out of time actually. Maybe we should move to the questions if there are any.
Okay. Okay. So let's do that. I'm open to any question. We haven't discussed treatment.
Yes.
But it was very good, but we really need treatment.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
I am Hüsnü Erkmen from hospital. Thank you very much for your very mind-opening lecture. But I am a clinician. The most important part is for me is treatment. We have a lot of patients like this. Really, many of the clinicians, nearly all over the world, don't want to see it. They come here with a depression and with this syndrome, and we say the most important part of your problem is your depression. We are going to treat it, and let's forget about it.
Yeah.
It's same as in bipolar disorder. There is a lot of anxiety disorder, and it's very bad for them. But many of the clinicians don't want to see the anxiety disorder. They treat bipolar disorder, and the other one goes on wherever it goes. Therefore, treatment is...
Yeah, let me talk very briefly about treatment, because we just...
Yes, please, yes.
We just finished a randomized clinical trial with mindfulness training, because the people they were talking about how they are not anchored in reality. So we thought if we teach them mindfulness training, how to be present and aware of sounds, smells, body sensations, that this is incompatible with focusing inside. Mindfulness training is about being present in the moment with all your senses. And we conducted an 8-session online training for maladaptive daydreaming, yes, with mindfulness training, randomized clinical trial. So there was a waiting list and there was another condition. And this seems to be very helpful, and both immediately after and also at a follow-up of 6-month follow-up. But again, what is also very important, we found out, is self-monitoring. It's like any addiction. If people tend to deny how much time they spend in fantasy, they don't like to think about themselves as addicted. So the moment you ask them to keep a diary of their daydreaming, they become more self-accountable. And although we want to measure, the measurement itself is an intervention, because they are more aware of how they're doing it, and they are accountable, they can make a decision. But this in combination with, we also did a motivational interviewing like you do with drug addicts. They need to have a very high motivation to be very clear what are the costs of this addiction and what are the benefits from reducing it. And they need to remind themselves, maybe with little stickers, with little reminders, to keep their motivation high, because this is very fun activity to do. So we need to boost their motivation. We need monitoring, self-monitoring, and mindfulness training. Now, this is about the addiction, but you would agree with me that many addictions are self-medication for other problems. So you need to identify what are the underlying issues they are self-medicating for. Depression, loneliness, lack of social skills, childhood trauma memories, these need to be treated also. So I suggest a two-pronged approach, a double approach, dealing with the underlying issues, but also providing them with skills to control their fantasy better. And of course, the goal is not to have them stop daydreaming. It's like an eating disorder. You don't want a patient to stop eating. It's impossible. But they need to gain better control. So these are the initial data that we have about treatment.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question, Barış?
Please go on.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor
Barış, ben de
Somer.
bir Nesrin
That was
Hoca'dan sonra ben de bir konuşmak istiyorum.
Tamam.
Okay, that was a nice presentation, really. I'm mostly working about the addiction. So I have first some comments, and then I will ask you a question about the addiction and the daydreaming. I was thinking it was just like a defense mechanism because most of the people for like the ego defense mechanism, when they don't keep up with the world, so they were escaping from the world to keep up their ego strength. So that was what I was thinking, and I just want to learn about your opinion about the defense mechanism. It's a maladaptive defense mechanism. That's what I was thinking. And the other one, when you look up as the descriptive, it looks like the addiction. But is there any biological study, like during the maladaptive daydreaming, is there any measurement of the dopamine receptor numbers, occupation that will show it's a kind of addiction?
No, we don't. We just, by the behavior itself, we characterize it as an addiction. We don't know anything about the brain function, biochemical or physiological or electronic activity of the brain. And
so it's just a descriptive one, right? It's just a descriptive, clinical description. So it's really hard because I'm also working about the mindfulness, but for these kinds of people, when you think that they cannot keep up with the world, they cannot keep up with the trauma, they are escaping it. So it's really hard for them to keep up at the daytime now, to keep up them at the now. So we are having a difficulty to go on with the mindfulness for this one because that's their problem. They are escaping from the today. So, I just want to learn your techniques. How did you have the successful sessions, mindfulness sessions?
Well, we were able to reduce the level of maladaptive daydreaming, but not, but only a small portion were not qualifying anymore in the diagnostic criteria. So this is a step. Well, only 8 sessions, and it was self-directed, no clinical contact with a human being. They were just learning skills. And so this is just a pointing towards a direction. But I agree with you that a lot more needs to be done. And for those who are self-medicating with maladaptive daydreaming, simply taking away their defense mechanism is not fair and not enough. You need to give them something. Yeah. So, but we
Thank you.
Now our president will ask a question of the university. Buyurun hocam. Nevzat hocam buyurun.
Ben Türkçe olarak sormak istiyorum.
Siz sorun buyurun.
Tamam. Şimdi ben psikiyatri 40 yıla yakındır psikiyatri deneyim içerisinde Sayın Eli Somer'in bahsettiği vakalarla ilgili yaklaşımımı söylemek istiyorum. Bir klinik antite olarak gerçekten bu maladaptif bozukluk tarzında diye dissociative grubun altında böyle bir tanı değerlendirmemizi ben doğru ve gerçekçi buluyorum. Neden? Çünkü mesela bize bazen elektif işitsel halüsinasyonla kişiler geliyorlar. Çok ileri. Fakat şizofreni tanısı almış. Birçok meslektaşımız şizofreni diye tedavi etmiş. Ben öyle incelediğim vakalara bakıyorum. Şizofreninin verdiği diğer kişilik dağılması yıllar geçtiği halde deteriore olmuyorlar, dağılmıyorlar, yıkım yok kişilerde. Onun üzerine bu kişilerin psikolojik ihtiyacı nedir? Yani hastalığın kök nedenini, kök sebebini araştırarak onu araştırıyorum ve şu vakayı görüyorum. Bu kişiler son derece yalnızlıktan yakınan kişiler. Yalnızlığı korkan kişiler. Yalnız kaldıkları zaman kendilerini güvende hissetmiyorlar ve biz bu kişilere yakın ilişkiler, yaşantılarla ilgili güvenli bağlanma var mı yok mu diye araştırıyoruz. Ve bu kişilerde güvenli bağlanma yok çıkıyor. kaygılı bağlanma, kaçıngan bağlanma, dezorganize bağlanma çıkıyor. Ve bunun üzerine bu kişilere biz güvenli bağlanma çalışması yapıyoruz. Bir kişiyle kararlı, devamlı, tutarlı ilişki kurabilmesi yapıyoruz ve bu kişilerin o halüsinasyonlarını bulduktan sonra sorguladıklarını ve ihtiyaç hissetmediklerini görüyoruz. Eğer çok ilerlememişse bunu söylemek istiyorum. İkinci olarak da biyolojik kanıt olarak şunun araştırılmasını öneriyorum. Bağlanma duygusu biliyorsun biyolojik olarak insanın doğasında olan var. Genetik olarak da karşılığı araştırılması gereken bir şey. Mesela bağlanma duygusuyla ilgili hormon oksitosin hormonu. Oksitosin hormonu en yüksek emziren annelerde salgılanıyor. Ve ikinci bir hormon stres hormonudur oksitosin. Yani stres altında hayvanların bir araya gelmesini, insanların hemen bir araya gelmesini düşünün. Bunu oksitosine borçluyuz. Yani üçüncüsü de oksitosin aşk hormonu. Aşıkların bağlanmasını düşünün, birbirine bağlanmasını. Yani üç farklı klinik antideri de bak. Yani oksitosin eksikliği diyebileceğimiz bir eksiklik söz konusu. Eğer biz oksitosini bu kişilerde ölçebilirsek, oksitosin gen aktivitesini, oksitosinle ilgili bir gen polimorfizmi var mı? Bunu ölçebilirsek biyolojik patolojiyi de bulabiliriz. Yani benim bu konuda yani kendi klinik tecrübemde bağlanmayı çalışmasının faydalı olduğu ve oksitosin aşırı salgılanmasını önleyen de anti-stres tedaviler. Güvenli alan çalışmaları. Bunu ben bu konuda ne düşünür Sayın Somer? Teşekkür ederim.
Okay. Eli, this is going to be a tough translation, but I will try to do
No,
it.
I received simultaneous translation.
Ah, okay. Then no need. Okay, go on, please. Did you receive the question in English? Okay, then can you answer?
Well, Professor, I think you touched upon an important point. We have Italian colleagues, Professor Adriano Schimenti and his colleagues, who are very much interested in attachment patterns. And this is exactly the issue that you're alluding to. Apparently, there is repeated evidence in three different studies that show that people with maladaptive daydreaming have insecure attachments, as you correctly pointed out. So at least there is a significant correlation. I would not say, of course, that it characterizes everyone, but to look at this preference of attaching safely to fantasized objects rather than real life objects is extremely interesting. I would say that, however, that there are several pathways leading to maladaptive daydreaming. Insecure attachment is an important pathway, but there could be others. We talked about trauma, but again, interpersonal trauma can damage attachment, secure attachment, of course. But you know, the exciting part of, I guess, my work currently, and I'm so happy that some of you are really familiar with this already, is that this is an embryonic field. It's a field that is just making its baby steps. And all your important observations deserve further research. So I really hope that this will generate some further studies in your university hospital.
Evet. Başka sorumuz var mı acaba?
Evet.
Tamam. O zaman Eli, we don't have any more questions. If you don't have any final remarks to mention, I will close the session.
Barış, bir soru sorabilir miyim müsaadenizle?
Okay, we have one final question. Please go on.
Yeah, this is final. I was late. Sir, did you see the effects of urban and rural studies upon this maladaptive daydreams? That's one. Secondly, I can understand from your explanation that daydream sometimes will, increase the entropy of the brain because so many things are going over there. Is it possible to measure the entropy of the brain and from there to get a scale, see what is the extent of this kind of maladreaming, and can you make a scale and from there make some comments? Have you thought about Dr. Somer? Have you thought about the entropy of the brain, like Shannon entropy?
We have absolutely no information about what's happening in the brain, and I'm as curious as you are about this. And I challenge you to initiate some research on this. So you and your colleagues. No, we know nothing about this, and I hear your implicit assumptions. They're very interesting. I would just ask briefly, can you tell me why you, what are your hypotheses with regard to country people and city-dwelling people with regard to daydreaming?
Well, because, in the city, you have so many things to get engaged. So daydreaming may not be that much, seen. Whereas in the rural area, in villages, the guy or the girl has nothing to do. So she will be pushed to think fantasy over there. So I will expect that in rural area, daydreaming will be more as compared to the cities let's say, per person.
Okay, I challenge you to launch this study. I challenge you.
All right.
Good.
Okay, this question was from an engineer, a professor of engineers. So he challenged you to make some comments about the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, I'm closing the sessions. Our time is up. And Eli, I'm really grateful that you are here and present, even though it's virtual, and you presented us a wonderful topic. Thank you.
And thank you for your collaboration with me.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Faydalı oldu. Teşekkür ederiz. Barış, ben özellikle teşekkür et. Biz ortak bir çalışmayla ilgili bir şey yapabiliriz. Özellikle genetik çalışma yapılabilir bu vakalarda. Genetik polimorfizm araştırabiliriz. Barış Bey söylerse iyi olur. Teşekkürler.
Tamam hocam, ben ileteceğim.
Tamam.
İyi günler diliyorum herkese. İyi çalışmalar. Görüşmek üzere.